Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our PIARC webinar on the COVID-19 crisis, with a focus on freight and logistics issues today. You are all very welcome. My name is Patrick Maléjac. I am the Secretary General of PIARC, the World Road Association, the organizers of this webinar today. So the agenda structure, well, first of all, the webinar should last less than 2 hours, I think. We will start with a brief introduction to PIARC and to issues faced by road operators. Then we will have 5 panelists from Australia, Poland, South Africa, as well as the USA, Texas, and the International Road Transport Union. This will be followed by a question and answers session, and then, of course, conclusions and next steps. Our speakers today are myself, Christina Heffner from the Department of Transport and Main Roads, Queensland in Australia, Piotr Macuk, sorry for the pronunciation, Piotr, from GDDKIA in Poland, Layton and Leseane from SANRAL in South Africa, Caroline Mays from the Texas DOT in the USA. These 4 colleagues are members of the Freight Committee of PIARC, Committee 2.3, as well as Jens Hügel, who is a senior advisor at IRU, the RRU, the International Road Transport Union. Thank you very much to our panelists for making themselves available. Your participants' microphones and cameras must be turned off. This is to ensure a smooth experience for everyone. But rest assured, you are very welcome to ask questions, to raise an issue, or maybe to share a practice, to share what you are doing in your organization or in your country. In order to do that, please use the chat feature of Zoom. It's located at the bottom right of the main window. And please send a message to all participants, which is one of the options, and of course focus on questions that are specific to roads or road transport, and freight and logistics would be preferable. That channel on the chat Zoom is monitored by Christos Xenophontos. Christos is the chair of our committee on the performance of transport organizations. Christos will monitor the questions and he will raise them to the relevant panelists during the Q&A session. About your name in Zoom, please name yourself in a way that will be easy to understand by everyone. For example, first name, last name, and country, because this will foster interaction between all participants, and it will make, in particular, it easier for us to organize the Q&A session later during our webinar. It's very easy to do under Zoom. The session is being recorded. The video will be shared on our website, probably tomorrow. And we will also share the slides as PDF files after translation to French and Spanish. So English, French, and Spanish versions of the slides will be available. Well, disclaimer, that's actually important. At PIARC, we have decided to act as quickly as we could. And since time is of the essence, it's quite likely that knowledge and practice that is shared will not have been officially approved by each country's or each organization's officials. It may be the case. The ideas and examples shared here are, as a consequence, for illustration only. They do not necessarily represent official policy. Care has been taken, great care has been taken in the preparation of this material, but no responsibility can be accepted for any damage that may be caused. To use at your own risk, but nevertheless convinced that this information will help you and help your organization handle the crisis. The key concept, indeed, is to focus on the short term. The world is going through a crisis and every day counts. At PIARC, we are convinced that sharing knowledge and current practice between PIARC members urgently is needed in order to support responses to the pandemic in near real time. Sometimes that knowledge has not been confirmed as valid or effective, and what works in some parts of the world may not be relevant elsewhere. This is something we are very familiar in our organization, and I'm sure you understand that very, very clearly. However, inspiration can be found anywhere, and the good idea that you would hear today could save lives, could help you improve business resilience, and could also help you minimize disruption of services. In parallel, at PIARC, we are planning medium to long-term actions for when the pandemic is in a manageable state and substantially under control. So this is the response team that we have set up. These are our dear colleagues from various countries and various PIARC committees who have joined us in order to set up those webinars and all this material that we are very happy to share with the road community worldwide. You have their names here and their profile pictures as well. So thank you again to you all, guys. I think you're all doing a good job. So the agenda structure for today, again, well, you've seen that, so I hope it will answer your needs and expectations. The panelists will speak one after the other. Each of them has about 15 minutes to go through their presentation, and that's actually kind of important because we really want to have time for the question and answers section of the webinar in about an hour or an hour and 15-20 minutes from now. With this, I will guide you through what PIARC is very briefly. I'm still Patrick Maniak, Secretary General of PIARC. PIARC is the new name of the World Road Association. We were founded in 1909, more than 110 years now, as a non-profit, non-political association. Our goal is to organize exchange of knowledge on all matters related to roads and road transport. This is exactly what we are trying to do here with this webinar. We have four main missions. The first one is to be an international forum for analysis and discussion of any topic related to roads and road transport. Well, we meet, we convene, we organize technical committees, approximately 20 now. We identify, develop, and disseminate best practice, and we give better access to international information. The way we do that usually the main tool we use is that we organize the publication of technical reports. On average, we publish one report every month on all these topics, and those reports are developed by our technical committees. Those committees are made up of experts, volunteers from many countries, and currently we have about 1,000 experts in all of our technical committees. Our third mission is to consider within our activities the needs of low and middle income countries or developing countries and countries in transition. The way we do that is we ask them for what they would like PIARC to work on. We include them as members in our committees actively, and we organize seminars in those countries. So PIARC addresses the needs of all countries, high-income countries and low and middle-income countries. The fourth mission for us is to design, produce, and promote tools for decision-making. You may be familiar with the HDM4 software tool that helps with decisions on road investments, or QRAM, which is used by many European countries to help them make decisions about transportation of dangerous goods in tunnels. As I said, we mobilize the expertise of our members, all of them volunteers from more than 120 member countries. Our operations are guided by a 4-year strategic plan. This is because it's very important to guide experts in general, especially when they are from very different backgrounds and very different countries. Of course, the plan had not foreseen the COVID-19 crisis, but nevertheless, we are trying to adjust and to serve our missions in these trying times. So what are the issues faced by road operators and administrations? We have structured that around 6 key broad issues. Issue number 1 is to ensure your employees' health and safety in general. Well, that applies to everyone. It applies to your employees as well. In some cases, or in many cases actually, employees will be working from home. So you need to ensure that you can maintain business activities. You need to provide them with masks, with other ways of staying safe at the office or at work. Think about toll booth operators, for example. Issue number 2 is to maintain activity and business continuity, even though, well, it's a crisis. Many of your employees may be working from home. Some of them may be ill. Some of them may need to stay at home so as to care for their children, and others may be facing mental health issues in this very difficult context. The third issue is, of course, to face and analyze the impact on transportation. In many countries, we've seen a reduction in traffic, which sometimes means a different reduction in revenues, how to handle that. Nevertheless, roads need to stay open. And in some countries, we have seen an increase in road accidents, how to handle that now. In some cases, we've also seen that countries use this time with lower traffic levels to conduct to conduct roadworks. Issue number 4 is business relations, and which is means that you have to maintain relations with your providers, your suppliers, your contractors, because they help you achieve your objectives, but they are also faced with the same issues. In some cases, you may need to exercise some provisions, such as force majeure or disaster provisions in your contracts with those partners. This a particular case is that of concession contracts or PPPs. The 5th issue is more broadly about customer and stakeholder relations and joint working. You need to liaise with your customers, let them know what's going on your network. This could be car drivers, truck drivers, logistics company. We'll hear more about that. And at the same time, you need to work jointly with the police, with security forces. The 6th issue is about security. It applies to the road sector as well. Since many people are working from home nowadays, we've seen an increase in cyber attacks, and this needs to be handled very, very carefully. This is just one of the examples. Those issues were presented and handled in more detail during our previous webinars, and I refer you to their video recordings and PowerPoint slides that are available from piarc.org. A first note of this is actually available. It presents the emerging findings from the first 4 webinars. We have now organized 10 webinars. Second note is forthcoming. Those findings are relevant for the road community and may be useful for you, I hope. The note is available in English, Spanish, and French for free from our website. I think this is all for the introduction. Your questions are really welcome. Please use the chat feature of Zoom. And I think, Christina, now is the time for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for the invitation to present today on the freight and logistics supply chain in Queensland, COVID-19 challenges, measures and impacts. The Department of Transport and Main Roads moves and connects people, places, goods and services safely, efficiently and effectively across Queensland. We plan, manage and deliver Queensland's integrated transport environment to achieve a sustainable transport solution for road, rail, air and sea. With 33,369 kilometres of state-controlled roads, 3,113 bridges owned and maintained, and over 985 million tonnes of freight moved on the surface network, our integrated transport planning approach ensures we contribute to people's quality of life, Queensland's economic well-being, and a sustainable environment. Next slide. COVID-19 was first confirmed in Australia in late January 2020. The total number of confirmed COVID-19 cases across Australia as at Monday, the 4th of May, was 6,825, with 95 deaths recorded. In responding to COVID-19, Australia has implemented a number of early intervention measures with the aim of flattening the curve. These have been largely successful at slowing the growth of cases domestically and in ensuring that the national healthcare system has the ability to cope with actual cases and any potential surge in cases if or when required. Australia continues to see a steady decline in the number of new cases and as such is now looking at reviewing and resetting its baseline restrictions, ensuring that the right controls continue to be in place, that we continue to test more people, trace those who test positive and respond to local outbreaks as they occur. Next slide. As at Monday, the 4th of May, Queensland had 3 new cases, bringing our total number of cases to 1,038. A total of 980 Queenslanders, which is 94% of total cases, have now recovered, and a total of 6 deaths have been recorded. Queensland's testing criteria has been expanded so that anyone in the state who has a fever or history of a fever or acute respiratory symptoms can now get tested. Next slide. Through National Cabinet, Australia's federal, state and territory governments have been working together to implement a number of measures to help reduce the spread of COVID-19. However, the state and territory governments remain responsible for the measures introduced in their jurisdictions, including interstate border controls. For those of you who are not aware, Australia is an open border country and does not have fixed border crossings in place, which means you can move freely between our states and territories. This slide and the next slide reflect a timeline of public health directions implemented. As a number of cases increased, the measures became stricter. For example, the closure of bars, clubs, restaurants, etc. was implemented on the 23rd of March as Queensland's recorded 319 cases, which was an increase of 135 cases in 3 days. Next slide. On the 25th of March, Queensland closed its state borders. Only Queensland residents and residents of border communities undertaking essential activities and those considered an exempt person were allowed to enter Queensland. The border controls were implemented and enforced by the Queensland Police Service and Transport Inspectors, and supported where applicable by the Australian Defence and Border Protection personnel. Over subsequent weeks, our border restrictions have been tightened several times and a home confinement restriction implemented. Whilst the border controls continue to remain in place, on the 2nd of May, in response to the decreasing number of new cases, the home confinement restrictions were eased. This allowed persons to undertake some activities for pleasure within 50 kilometres of their home residence, whilst adhering to social distancing of 1.5 metres from others, regular hand washing and avoiding handshaking. Next slide. During COVID-19, the Department of Transport and Main Roads has been able to call upon its existing suite of policies, programs and investment strategies that recognise the importance of Queensland's freight system and provide direction on supporting and delivering collaboratively with industry and the community. The 2019 Queensland Freight Strategy sets a clear 10-year vision for Queensland's freight system. Our Queensland Transport and Road Investment Program outlines the transport and road infrastructure projects the Queensland Government has planned to deliver over the next 4 years, and our port master plans provide a long-term outlook for sustainable development at the ports. COVID-19 has had a significant impact on normal business for the freight and logistics sector. We have seen a strain on our local supply chains, freight, shipping and grocery deliveries, not from a lack of supply, but increased demand brought about by panic buying, affecting traditional just-in-time delivery models. In response to this, the Queensland Government introduced urgent reforms to ensure supermarkets remained well stocked to deal with the unprecedented demand for groceries, allowing the operating hours of loading docks and distribution centres supplying supermarkets to operate 24 hours a day where necessary. The road transport industry has reported that road freight transport volumes due to COVID-19 were more than twice pre-Christmas peak periods, with road freight only just returning to normal levels in the past week. Government and industry representatives have capitalised on existing working relationships to apply a collaborative approach in addressing demand and freight movements. They continue to meet on a regular basis to ensure operators and stakeholders across the supply chain are apprised of and updated on border access information, and that solutions to issues across the freight network are addressed. Next slide. To ensure the continued movement of freight into and across the Queensland border whilst restrictions were in place, persons who were providing the transportation of goods or freight, including food by sea, land or air, were recognised as an exempt person. Whilst it was initially expected that all exempt persons would apply for a Queensland entry pass, to combat delays, heavy vehicle and freight trains did not have to apply. In fact, wherever possible, our heavy vehicles were being waved through at the border. For example, in cases where the border road had 2 lanes, one was made a dedicated freight lane, and in one of our main regional areas, a temporary roadway was constructed to assist the movement of heavy vehicles transporting freight by moving vehicles being questioned off the single lane main thoroughfare. Our service stations with dedicated truck rest stops were also granted a special exemption to remain open and continue operating. As long as social distancing and appropriate hygiene requirements were applied, this allowed heavy vehicle drivers with continued access to showers, restrooms, and facilities to undertake their mandated fatigue management breaks. To further assist heavy vehicle drivers, an online tool mapping service stations, truck stops, and roadhouses that have remained open was developed. Queensland also made changes to registration fees to support those being impacted by COVID-19. A freeze on yearly increases to registration fees for heavy vehicles was put in place, and to assist in fleet operations, deregistration and re-registration fees were waived, and these measures will remain in place until 30 June 2021. Australia's National Heavy Vehicle Regulator has also facilitated a number of regulatory exemptions, including but not limited to waived restrictions on curfew permits, except those related to safety and access, the extended use of supplementary work diary records for up to 30 days, and the temporary relaxation of calibration requirements for roller brake testing equipment. Next slide. In addition to the fee relief and waivers I have mentioned, the Queensland Government is working towards COVID-19 economic recovery phase. Already, the Queensland Government has announced a $54.5 million package that will allow regional air, bus and ferry services to keep running whilst social distancing measures remain in place. The early commencement of a $185 million investment in key inland freight corridors, as well as boosting road construction jobs for regional Queensland communities, and a $2.3 million package to support port businesses across far north Queensland. In addition, the Australian Government has announced a targeted $17.6 billion stimulus package focused on keeping Australians in jobs and helping small and medium-sized businesses. Next slide. In relation to Queensland toll roads, Queensland motorists have enjoyed the benefits of free flow tolling without the need to stop and pay the toll since 2009. Toll road operators provide several different payment options to suit individual customer needs. Next slide. As you may or may not be aware, Queensland has a limited number of toll roads. These roads have remained fully operational and continue to serve as essential functions of moving people and goods during COVID-19. All toll roads have observed a reduction in passenger vehicle volumes during the COVID-19 home confinement restriction period. Total traffic volumes on Brisbane's metropolitan toll roads have decreased during this period as well. In Queensland, Transurban Queensland provides toll collection services on all toll roads through its tolling provider Linked. Linked has put in place a number of measures to assist motorists directly impacted by COVID-19, including increasing the time customers have to pay for toll road use, waiving administration fees, and offering payment plans. Linked has also expanded its assistance program to support its customers who are directly impacted by COVID-19, including healthcare workers, emergency workers, and those displaced from employment at this time, by offering up to 3 months toll credit. Linked Assist also continues to offer a hardship program for those customers experiencing financial and social challenges. Next slide. The Toowoomba Bypass is a key Queensland regional freight route that was purpose-built as a toll road to accommodate larger heavy vehicles. This slide reflects that heavy vehicle traffic on the Toowoomba Bypass has remained relatively steady during COVID-19 movement restrictions. Commercial traffic has displayed greater resilience to the impacts of COVID-19 to date. There continues to be significant road use by heavy vehicles in southeast Queensland as the freight industry plays its role in supplying Australians with the necessities of living. This reflects the essential nature of supply chain traffic and the benefits of toll roads for continued service delivery to support this industry. Next slide. And thank you for your time today. And I, as Patrick mentioned, will be available for questions at the end of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. That was very informative and very detailed. Thank you very much. Before we move on to our next presentation, I would like to invite everyone to ask questions. Don't be shy, and share your ideas and input in the chat here on the Zoom. Please don't hesitate. And also, some of you have selected an odd name on the Zoom. I see someone called iPhone and someone called Oppo. For example, please make sure that your name in Zoom reflects your identity so that we know who we are dealing with. Thank you very much. So our next presenter is Piotr Macuk. Sorry, Piotr, again for not pronouncing your name properly, from Poland. Thank you, Piotr. Your turn.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Good morning also, and good evening. It depends of time zones. My name is Piotr Macuk. I am head of the Administrative Proceeding Unit of the Road Network Management Department, a General Directorate for National Roads and Motorways. I've worked at General Directorate since February 2009. I'm also a new member of PIARC Technical Committee since March this year. I have a great pleasure to meet you all and present some information from perspective of a National Roads Manager. So we can start next slide. At the beginning, I would like to present the legislative situation during the COVID-19 period. Due to the dynamically changing situation, future changes in law were, for example, aimed at limiting the movement, of course, expect heavyweight vehicles, and supporting companies and co-financing workplaces. But the way I would like to say that transport companies can use this type of solution. The next slide, please. There we have two categories of heavy transports. The standard vehicles like trucks and non-standard oversized vehicles. Passage of these categories of vehicles are differently regulated in Polish law. Standard vehicles like normal trucks move similar to other vehicles like buses or even passenger cars, with the difference that an electronic fee is charged for vehicles over 3.5 tons. Oversized vehicles can move only on special permission. The next slide, please. How you can see, facilities for non-standard vehicles include, in particular, move without special permission when oversized vehicles transporting equipment to hospitals, cooperate with the controlling services, the passage of non-standard vehicles when the drivers don't have the original permission, and work of a fully electronic permit issuing system. The next slide, please. On this slide, I would like to present statistic for non-standard vehicles. As you can see, the number of applications received is about the same level. However, the number of permits issued in March 2020 increased significantly. The reason was the large number of the applications submitted in February 2020, but also the reason was a restriction on the movement of people. The transport companies wanted to manage the abnormal freight before restriction, and they did it, obviously. The next slide, please. The slides show us a graph which showing the changes I was talking about in the previous slide. However, this chart indicates more the scale of change in the March 2020. The next slide, please. This slide shows the facilities for the heavyweight transport, as a petrol station, parking, information about borders and hotels. And please note that the link below is official information which should be read by everyone, also driver. In addition, with changes in restrictions related to COVID-19, each mobile registered in the mobile phone network receive SMS about the changes and information about the virus. The most important information that is important: we don't have any hour or day restriction on traffic. On the next slide, please. There we can see also there we can see rest areas for travelers or various categories along national roads, like blue, green, red, and gray. But gray are rest areas. They are private property. Of course, please do not suggest points of the map in terms of the rest areas, because in Poland are a lot of regular parking on normal national roads, but I mean not expressway and highway. These points show us the rest areas on the expressway and motorways. Below is a link to current information about the number and position of rest areas in Poland. In general, we have over 240 rest areas for travelers and hundreds of regular parkings. I have to say that we yesterday signed a contract for national traffic management system, which will be showing the number of available parking space at the nearest rest areas and parks. And next slide, please. And at this point, I would like to present situation at the borders. It presents you the situation when the situation with COVID-19 started until now. We can see a decrease on March 15. It was caused by restriction on the movement of people. However, it did not apply the passage of heavyweight vehicles in international and national transport. Next slide, please. The slides presents Poland's reaction on the situation with COVID-19. Actions were carried out according to the situation. These activities have allowed for unloaded at the borders, mainly. And the next slide, please. On this slide, we can see traffic volume regarding all traffic and heavy vehicle traffic in Poland. As you can see, as a whole, heavy vehicle traffic has not changed significantly, and the change may be up to a maximum of 3% compared to the period before the restriction resulting from COVID-19. You can also see on some road section, heavyweight vehicles traffic has even increased. It's worth to say that the traffic volume in the on the end of the April decreased about 10% compared to the March period. And next slide. What we have learned, what we can change in similar situation in the future. First of all, dealing with all formalities. I have many formal papers electronically, without physical contact face-to-face. Second, increase cooperation with controlling service on heavyweight vehicles, so that increases situation transport companies carry out their task exceed formalism, and wider and deeper cooperation with other countries on solution that we will allow the that we allow the development or unification of a legal system or solution that will be similar in every country. And next slide, please. Thank you for your attention. If you have any question, I will answer after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piotr. Thank you very much for your presentation. Again, questions are very, very welcome. Everyone, please don't hesitate and use the chat for that. I see that some of you are already discussing actively in the chat. So don't hesitate and please use that. So our next presenter is from South Africa, Layton Leseane from SANRAL, who presents us the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on South Africa's roads operations, freight movement, and logistics. Layton, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. Thanks for giving me this opportunity, Patrick. Next slide, please. Yeah, my name is Layton Leseane. I work for SANRAL, being the South African National Roads Agency. I work at the regional office in Pretoria. I've been a project manager in roads construction and currently work in the CAPEX division of SANRAL and do overload control operations. Next slide, please. Just the key points of discussion on this presentation. Just to introduce the mandate of SANRAL and give a broader overview of its road network. COVID-19 in South Africa, just if output from the government interventions that have been made so far, the impact it has had on SANRAL's operations currently, and how we foresee it going forward. The impact it has had on freight and logistics currently, and the impact as we predict going forward. Conclusions and possible post-COVID-19 interventions. As you may see there in the photos, this is in the Kruger Park in South Africa. The lions have taken the space on the road because the roads are free. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Introduction of SANRAL. SANRAL is an agency of the South African National Department of Transport. It's a custodian of about 22,000 kilometers of national roads. Those are being strategic roads and regional roads right across South Africa in all the 9 provinces. Just a brief overview of South African road network. It has about 750,000 kilometers of road network in total. Of those, 158,000 about are paved and 460,000 are unpaved. The total that is proclaimed, that is belonging to the national departments or provincial or regional, as may be called, elsewhere. Municipal government is 618,000 kilometers. SANRAL's road network comprises about 19,000 kilometers of non-toll roads, which is roads funded solely by the state, and about 3,000 kilometers of toll roads. In South Africa, we have 3 major toll concessions that are currently running. They are managing about 1,200 kilometers. As you can see on the map, the South African National Road Network, which SANRAL manages, links the major seaports, mainly on the east coast, to the inland economic hubs and neighboring countries such as Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Botswana, Namibia, and this lead further on to other countries such as Zambia, DRC, and so on, that transport cargo, a lot of mineral through to the ports in South Africa. South Africa, we have about 85% of freight that is being transported by road, and very less that is transported on rail and so on. Next slide, please. Just a brief overview, and this is a very compressed version of COVID-19 government's response in South Africa. We got our first case reported on the 5th of March, and on the 26th March, we started our first, what we call a national lockdown, 3 weeks thereof, and it was further extended by 2 weeks. The aim of this is to also slow down the curve, as has been mentioned before, to make sure that the health system is ready to deal with the thing. Currently, South Africa is sitting on about 8,000, between 7,500 to 8,000 cases of COVID-19 confirmed. Just COVID-19 regulations that are affecting road operations, freight, and logistics. Major sectors of the economy were shut down except those in production of essential goods or trade thereof. All international borders were closed down except for the passage of essential cargo, fuel, food, and medicines. And there were restrictions on inter-provincial movement and public transport. As of May the 1st, there was a relaxation in regulations, basically allowing limited activity in primary sectors of such as mining, agriculture, and others. This is to state the economy because we were in a full lockdown for almost 5 weeks. So the government, through a risk-adjusted strategy, has relaxed some of the lockdown regulations. There are strict health and safety regulations similar to other countries, such as social distancing, etc., that governs how workplace must function under COVID-19 prevalence. In South Africa, the government has committed 500 billion rands, or about $27 billion relief package aimed at stimulating the economy or to assist affected businesses, workers that lost salaries, those social grants recipients, and for the first time, unemployed people will also get a small grant monthly. Next slide. So the impact on SANRAL's operations currently, just some highlights thereof. All offices were closed for normal business operations. Some of the staff had to work from home, etc. SANRAL suspended all construction projects in line with or in compliance with level 5 lockdown regulations. This suspension has since been lifted as of the 1st of May, when level 4 was introduced, that reduced some of the restrictions and allowed construction as a sector to start operating. There are contractual claims or will be contractual claims from both contractors and consultants for losses incurred during the stoppages. Only critical and essential maintenance is carried out during this time to maintain the road and make sure the roads are safe to use. All bidding or tender processes were suspended. 70% decline of road traffic, all classes of traffic, which means a huge loss of toll income for SANRAL. SANRAL established the COVID-19 task team to coordinate SANRAL's response actions and ensure business operating procedures that are compliant with COVID-19 OSHA regulations. Next slide, please. This is just an indication of how traffic declined. We had about a 70% drop in traffic, typically one of the counting stations for heavy vehicles. We saw traffic coming down, heavy traffic coming down from 5,000 vehicles a day up to 1,500 about. Next slide, please. So this is how we see SANRAL operations being impacted post-COVID-19. There'll be a phased return to normal business. It will be ramped up over time with a rotation of staff to minimize the risk of infections and so on. There will be measured delays to construction projects with cost implications due to contractual claims from contractors and consulting engineers. There will be potential work stoppages since there will be infections happening. Cost implications of complying with COVID-19 occupational health and safety regulations and related standard operating procedures. As would be expected, there will be major backlog due to restrictions on construction projects. Potential delays to rollout of projects due to procurement disruptions and reprioritization of funding allocations by National Treasury. It's expected that to fund some of the 500 billion rands, some of the money will be taken out from other departments. So this may affect SANRAL's sustainability to an extent. There'll be a potential major decline in toll revenue due to economic conditions post-COVID-19 crisis. It's a high risk to business sustainability. Next slide, please. In terms of freight and logistics sector, this is information we gathered from the Road Freight Association of South Africa. Say that only 25% of the fleet is operating currently or under orders level 5, and 20% of businesses are operating at between 7 and 75% of their normal capacity. And some of the things they experience include operational challenges for long distance drivers, where unlike Australia, they have no hot meals. There were limited, restricted stops on many routes. Another challenge was the incorrect application of lockdown regulations by traffic officers or law enforcement agencies in some cases, which resulted in unlawful arrest or impounding of vehicles. The lengthy delays at ports of entry and quarantine of drivers at some of the major borders, such as the Zimbabwe border and Mozambique border. Drivers face a risk of unemployment due to the economic decline that comes with COVID-19. There's loss of profit leading to business closures, and freight companies storing non-essential goods at their warehouse at the cost. Next slide. Post the COVID-19 crisis, some of the impacts that are foreseen is loss of industry capacity, as many companies, freight companies, will be closed due to being non-profitable and so on, or having suffered major losses during the crisis. The job losses are estimated at 50% currently. There's a change of market due to economic loss. There's an increase in operating costs due to compliance of COVID-19 regulations, inefficiencies at border controls, ports, etc., which are very costly. There's also an administrative burden arising from assisting workers to claim wages from the unemployment fund. There'll be litigation with customers who fail to pay for services or to freight companies that have provided them with services, that being because they are also affected by the crisis as well. There'll be repossession of vehicles by vehicle finance companies. Loss of capacity in the road freight industry has the potential to incapacitate the logistics sector for a number of years. Next slide. In terms of conclusion, there'll be a wide range of key interventions that must be effected by the RSA government and or the private sector to reverse the impact of COVID-19 crisis on road operations, freight and the logistics sector. Some of them include, there will be a need for accelerated procurement or project delivery, that is for roads and bridges projects, in order to create jobs and revive the construction sector, which is very key. There will be a need for additional budget allocation to fund the effects of COVID-19 crisis, that is cost of the disruptions that have been experienced thus far. Need for a streamlined and speedy contract dispute resolution, deal with COVID-19 related contractual claims. Wider consultation, stakeholder engagement between government, freight and logistics sector and other transport sectors aimed at reduction of transport costs. There will be a need for those who are affected in the freight sector to be assisted, be it through loans or subsidies, to get them back into business. And most key will be a need for harmonizing regional regulations that promote transport efficiency. Next slide, please. And thank you very much. I will take questions at the end. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Layton. That was very clear, very interesting. So I guess there will be lots of questions from the audience. Don't hesitate and ask questions to Layton and to all the other panelists, please. And having said that, let's move on to our fourth panelist from Texas DOT. Texas DOT in the USA. So Caroline, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Patrick. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are on the different time zones. My name is Caroline Mays, and I'll be talking to you about freight and logistics impact of COVID in Texas. Next slide. As I mentioned, my name is Caroline Mays, and I work for the Texas Department of Transportation, one of the state departments of transportations in the United States. And my role at the agency is I serve as Director of Freight, International Trade and Connectivity section. And then I also serve on the PIARC Technical Committee for Freight. I'm a member, and then I'm a working group leader for emerging freight technologies within PIARC. So a little bit about Texas and the transportation system. Just a second there. The Texas Department of Transportation, we have about over 12,000 employees. And we manage about 80,000 miles of roadways in Texas. The total road center line miles in Texas is about 313. And Texas, we have over 52,000 bridges, 26,000 more than any state in the United States. And TxDOT manages 66% of those 52,000 bridges. Next slide. So my presentation is going to focus on kind of two things. One, look at freight, the impacts of COVID on freight, and I'm going to talk about some national impacts, regional impacts, then Texas, and then the final portion of my presentation will touch on cross-border impacts. Texas shares the border with Mexico, so kind of to give you a lay of the land. A lot of my colleagues have talked about the impacts stay at home in their countries. COVID impacts began in the United States about mid-March, and the first state to issue stay at home was California, and then Texas issued stay at home order on March 31st. And essentially by about mid-April, at least 95% of US population were under some type of stay-at-home order. Some states did not do stay-at-home orders, so just kind of give people an understanding that a lot of it was left to the states to institute their own stay-at-home order. So in terms of the freight movement, one of the things that we saw was really, VMT dropping for passenger travel, a much greater drop than we saw for freight movement in the first week. The second week, we saw, VMT, truck VMT decrease by 27%. And really, a lot of it, by 7%, and then passenger travel decreased by 25%. So you see, as we progress through COVID, we saw that, truck VMT started kind of bouncing back because of the consumer demands for the goods and services throughout the United States. Next slide. And this slide shows from a national perspective, and this research was done by NRIX to look at, different regions of the United States, how truck VMT dropped starting in the first week of COVID, which was in March, and going into week 5 towards April. And as you can see, in week 1 through week 2, pretty much, VMT fell dramatically through all the regions. And then by week 3, kind of pulled back a little bit. But then you saw when you go to week 4 and week 5, pretty much, it started a downward trend again. But when you look at it, both the Western and Southern Gulf regions had the most decreases in truck VMT activity, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Next slide. So in this slide, really now focusing on the Southern Gulf region where Texas is a part of that. So there's several states within here. And as you can see, again, week 2, dramatic fall in truck VMT, pulled up a little bit to week 3, but then you see drop there. And really what to note here is that when you look at the entire region, you saw, 17% drop in truck VMT across the board in all the states. But Texas and Kentucky, we saw a 20% drop below the baseline. So normal operations back pre-COVID. And for us, a lot of the drop, I'll talk a little bit later, is we're a big oil state. So a lot of those facilities were not necessarily producing, but they're not moving it out of there. And then also trade with Mexico, which is a big component of our freight movement. So we see, our drop is much larger than the other states. Next slide. And this slide here is American Trucking Research Institute, ATRI, conducted, truck activity index, and this is essentially they use GPS data to develop truck activity matrix. And the goal is really to track impacts of pandemic or COVID on trucking operations at the state level by monitoring GPS truck levels over weekly time periods. And they did this from February 9th for 2020. And the results, as you see here, really shows, we had in the beginning, actually we had an uptick in truck activity about, week of February 23rd to 29th and March, because again, that was when there was a lot of consumer buying and panic. So the industry was kind of scaling up. And then after that, we kind of saw a drop, and as we went into April, we really saw, a big drop in terms of truck activity in Texas. And as I mentioned earlier, the reduction is really, cross-border trade with Mexico, the oil market, and closure of a lot of manufacturing facilities, especially on the Mexican side. Next slide. And the next slide really, here again, this data is from ATRI. ATRI has monitored congestion choke points around the United States for several years. And the ones in Texas, the ones I will show three here, Dallas, Houston, and Austin. The corridors you see here, these corridors have consistently been on the national freight bottlenecks for years. And as you can see, this is looking at March of week of March of 2018, 2019, and 2020. And as you can see, dramatic increases in speeds, especially in the AM peak for Dallas, whereby you see the speeds back in 2018, 2019 were about 20 miles an hour. And in 2020, the same week, we're now almost double that speed. So really dramatic increase there. For Houston, it's even, I think, much more dramatic as well. When you look at the AM peak, you're looking at speeds of about 15, 16 miles. And then during COVID, you're looking at almost, doubling the speed to, in some instances in the AM peak, to 50 miles an hour. Next slide. And this is for Austin. And Austin, I-35 in Austin is notorious in terms of freight choke point, freight bottlenecks, as you can see. And in Austin, the biggest challenge there is the PM peak. As you can see, before COVID, literally you're looking at speeds of 10 miles an hour or less during the PM peak, and that pretty much almost quadrupled, in terms of the increase in speeds in the PM peak to 45, in some instances 50 miles an hour. That's kind of unheard of in Austin. But all of these three examples shows you that, one, the stay-at-home impacted passenger travel. People were not commuting to work, so our highways were fairly open, allowing the speeds to increase and allowing freight to operate efficiently through some of these biggest choke points in our state. Next slide. And my colleagues mentioned, some of the issues, some of the impacts, presented to the industry as a result of COVID. Truck parking, we heard a lot. It's been in the news. Pretty much you don't turn on the news one day and you don't see truck drivers talking about, truck parking issues. Certainly, some of the, states closed rest areas, limiting safe truck parking, some of the truck parking facilities across the state. Thankfully in Texas, we did not close our rest areas. We kept all our safety areas open to the trucking industry. And then I also want to point out that ATRI also did a survey of the industry, and they found that 42% of truck drivers across the country indicated that finding truck parking was about the same during COVID as it was pre-COVID. And then the research also showed that there were some differences between long haul versus short haul truck drivers, bigger fleets, smaller fleets. So it's a, a detailed research, but I think I wanted to point out that, about 42% of truck drivers felt that the issues of truck parking really did not go away. Then the next thing that we heard a lot and keep hearing a lot is food. The ability for the truck drivers to find food because all the restaurants are closed, they can't go through drive-thrus, etc. So it's become a really big issue. A lot of the private stops have, stopped serving a lot of the foods because most of the time those were open, they can serve themselves, and now they have limited choices. States were also considering food trucks. Federal Highway on April 3rd, Federal Highway Administration on April 3rd issued a notice allowing states to permit the use of food trucks in rest areas to serve commercial drivers. And it's kind of been a mixed bag throughout the United States because, again, each state has different laws. Some have gone ahead and actually done that. Some of the food trucks have been sponsored by the association. And so it's been, really hodgepodge of, implementing this policy and this, use of food trucks at rest areas. In terms of health and safety, again, a lot of the drivers in the front lines, and you've all heard the shortages of a lot of the, safety gears, gloves, masks, etc. So that has been in the news a lot because a lot of this, and also the facilities. Some of the restrooms are closed in some of the major truck stops that they normally go to. They can't take showers because the showers are closed because of COVID. So you hear a lot of those issues from the truck drivers. And then from an industry perspective, one of the biggest challenges we're hearing is that the market is very volatile. Loads are no longer predictable. And in terms of the orders and, when they can fulfill, the freight and when they can move it. And then also a lot of things when they get to the docks, the dwell time to load and unload, because, just impacted, the freight market. And we heard from some of my colleagues as well. Next slide. So the next couple of slides kind of pivot to cross-border trade and impact on the Texas-Mexico border. So U.S. and Mexico share about 2,000 plus miles of border, and 60% or 1,200 miles of that is in Texas, so Texas and Mexico. To give you an idea of kind of what happened, during COVID, about March 21st, both the northern border, US and Canada border, they restricted travel, and then the southern border, US and Mexico, started restricting travel, whereby the border, the Customs and Border Protection Agency that manages the border partially closed both borders, and the US-Mexico border as well, only to essential travel. And that really kind of created the biggest challenge there. Mexico has a different list of what they considered essential. US has a different list of what they consider to be essential. So that has created really a challenge on the border, whereby you're seeing that the policies are not meshing, and there really needs to be harmonization of that. And why is this important? US and Mexico trade about $556 billion a year, and 70% of that crosses through Texas. And that equates to about 4 million trucks just coming northbound. If you look at both north and southbound, you're looking at 8 million trucks a year that crosses through that. Next slide. So in Texas, we have about 28 border crossings, and 13 or 14 of those handle commercial vehicles. And Laredo World Trade Bridge is the busiest border crossing, busiest port of entry, in the United States and pretty much in the Americas. And as you see here, the pictures, the footage you see here is actually, this is during COVID, but this is, you see both south and northbound. On your right-hand side, those are trucks going southbound. On your left-hand side, those are trucks coming northbound. So this is literally everyday occurrence. And this was on April 25th when things had rebounded a little bit, but I saw a 28% decline in truck volumes coming northbound. And then the entire system saw about 22% decline in volumes through that port of entry. Colombia, which is a much smaller border crossing, saw about 10 to 15% decline in northbound crossings. Next slide. And here it just shows you kind of graphically, you know, what has happened. As you can see, you know, since 2007, things were pretty steady, you know, minor variations, but as you see in April of 2020, you see that dramatic drop, you know, from about 170,000 to 120,000. So that's a big drop. Just shows you kind of, this is average monthly traffic crossing through Laredo, and you see that dramatic impact with COVID. Next slide. And the next set of bridges are kind of on the southernmost part of the United States, of Texas with Mexico, and we have several bridges there. And again, kind of trying to just show the impact of COVID. And the Florida National Bridge, which primarily handles commercial goods, they saw a 13% increase in traffic in March, but by April, they saw a 12% decrease compared to March. And then the other bridges that are much more smaller, they saw about 30% decline in commercial traffic, up to 40% in another bridge. And then from the Mexican side, this is southbound shipments, so this is what's going into Mexico, 40% reduction in southbound shipments to Tamaulipas, which is in Mexico, and then a 5% reduction in northbound shipments from Tamaulipas. Next slide. And this, again, just shows you one of the bridges. This is northbound traffic. This is what's coming from Mexico into Texas. And again, as you can see, really, you know, a steady amount of, you know, monthly truck volumes. And then you start seeing once COVID kind of hit in March, and we kind of a downward trend into April. And certainly this data is evolving as we move forward, and we're seeing this trend pretty much across all our border crossings. Next slide. And this one is El Paso, which is more to the west, the westmost point in Texas, and share border crossing with Mexico. And there we saw 13% decline in the cargo freight crossing northbound. And really, this part of the state or the border crossing was hit the hardest, because in the Mexican side, that's where a lot of the manufacturing, what we term as maquiladoras, that sector was hit really hard. You know, majority of the freight is electronics, and also really, you know, the non-essential closures left 37% of this industry operational. So imagine, you know, leather cutting, you know, almost 70% of the operations are left with 37%. Automotive industry was also completely shut down. So this really created a big challenge for them, because in Mexico, that is considered non-essential. In the US, it's considered essential. So there's those disconnects that has really created big disruptions in the supply chains, cross-border supply chains when it comes to electronics, automotives, because of the lack of harmonization of policies within the two countries. Next slide. So that really, you know, summarizes my presentation. Definitely look forward to questions, Patrick, and appreciate again the invitations to participate.
Thank you so much, Caroline. You're really, really, really welcome. We have a fifth panelist, but before we move on, a couple of remarks. So please ask questions in the chat. I see there's lots of questions and discussions going on there already. So I'm going to propose that we extend the duration of the webinar a little bit. to 45 minutes from now. It will be 3 p.m. in Paris. So 45 minutes from now. I understand that for some of you, this may be a constraint and you may need to leave. So if you need to leave and really want to ask a question just now, before you leave, please highlight that in the chat and Christos will make sure that your question is addressed before you leave us. And thank you again for everyone for their very insightful presentations. Our fifth panelist is not from PIARC. He's from the International Road Transport Union. Jens, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate the effort, and I'm really glad we can collaborate on this. Jens, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for giving me the floor and for allowing the IRU to to give a presentation here at this international webinar. Before I comment though with my presentation, I would like to commend PIARC and its Secretary General, Patrick Macuk, for the good work and the leadership that they do on dealing with the impact on the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Jens Hügel. I'm Senior Advisor with the International Road Transport Union, IRU. And in my short presentation, I would like to present to you the IRU first, then talk a little bit about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the road transport sector, and conclude with some of our work and how we see that road transport can drive the economic recovery. Now, to start with, who is the IRU? The IRU is the global leader in connecting societies with safe, efficient green mobility and logistics. Next slide, please. Through our membership, and we have more than 160 member associations in more than 80 countries, we represent and we speak on behalf of 3.5 million transport operating companies. And if you look at the share roughly of who we represent logistics operators, so truck operators, but also the bus and coach sector and the taxi sector. And the share is roughly 60 to 70% logistics providers and 30 to 40% mobility providers. Please go to the next slide. Road transport services have been crucial in responding to the crisis, but now many transport operators are struggling to survive. And I understand in some of the last webinars you already had some figures and some estimates, and listening carefully to the colleagues, distinguished colleagues from South Africa and Australia and the US, you see that the picture is really very grim. And just allow me to add a few more figures to this. If you look at the WTO figures, the global GDP is projected to contract in 2020 by up to 8%, and global trade will decrease by up to 32%. And if you listen to what the WTO, WCO, UN is saying, they all say this crisis is going to be bigger and worse than the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Now, if you go a little bit further down and you look at the impact on the road transport industry, for road goods transport, revenues declined by 40%. Many transport operators, such as transport of automotive parts, clothing, flowers, they are almost come to a complete standstill. Empty runnings, and that's a very important and crucial problem for the transport sector. Empty runnings have increased by 40%. And if you look into the future, it's equally grim. New contracts have declined by 60 to 90%. So that's for the freight sector. If you look at the passenger transport sector, tourist coach operations, long distance, international operations, school, kindergarten transport are down completely. They have come to a standstill. Taxi down to 80%, specialized transport for municipalities, sick elderly people down 80–90%. So this is really dramatic for the road transport sector, because the majority of our members and the transport operators are small and medium-sized enterprises. 80% roughly of all the transport companies are small and medium-sized enterprises, and they cannot deal anymore with the current impact, the economic impact. Yes, we need to keep drivers, workers, and transport users safe. But at the same time, we need to keep supply chains and mobility networks operational, and we need to keep transport operators in business. You cannot just switch on and switch off companies. You have to have them to drive later on the economic recovery. Their key problem at the moment, short-term problem, is liquidity. They are running out of cash. And we will see very soon, in the next 1, 2, 3 months, a dramatic wave of insolvencies. Now, what we call on governments is really that they help transport operators, small and medium-sized enterprises, with liquidity issues. For example, facilitate access to loans, facilitate delays to due dates for loan repayments, facilitate reduction of insurance premiums for non-used vehicles, set up financial programs for temporary unemployed, for road transport work. So there are some measures that can help transport operators to deal with their liquidity problem. Actually, the colleagues from the distinguished colleague from Australia said something very interesting. And also you see that in the US, in Texas, we have to align and accompany the fiscal measures with some operational measures. We have to establish special lanes for trucks at borders, for example. We need to have maximum flexibility on the interpretation of driving rules, driving restrictions, and tolerance measures to prolong the validity of expiring control documents like visas, certification of vehicles, licenses, and so on and so forth. So you have to have liquidity help, and you have to have at the same time non-fiscal measures put in place. Now that's kind of the short-term need that's there, but there's also a mid-term support scheme needed, and this has to be linked, of course, again, to cash, but also to real business incentives. Allow transport operators to do their business. And you could, for example, facilitate with like creating long duration multi-entry electronic visas, or introduce electronic permits, and so on and so forth, so that in the end, we can turn the challenge that we have into an opportunity. And we can turn the transport sector into an even more environmentally friendly and an even more digital transport industry. For example, you can link, and this is a suggestion that we made to governments, link investments and link to loans and to investments into safer and cleaner vehicles in the future. So there's something very practical that could help our industry to drive the economic recovery. The figures, the facts and figures that I have highlighted in my short presentation can also be found on our COVID-19 information hub. There you also have some practical tools that we provide to transport operators. We provide information services on borders, on our work with the UN Secretary General, with the G20, where we interact quite closely, and we have some good results that we can also share later on. But again, I would like to invite you to visit our COVID-19 information hub. It's on the website iru.org. And with this, I come to my closing slide. Next slide, please. And I would like to thank you for your attention. And I would like to say we are in this together. On the one hand, the road transport industry, the users of roads, and you, the builders of roads, we're in this together, and let's work to get out of this stronger than before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jens. This is highly appreciated. And I invite everyone to check your website for more information on how your members handle the crisis. This leads us to the Q&A that we've mentioned quite a few times already. This is moderated by Christos Xenophontos from the USA, Rhode Island DOT. Christos is the chair of our Committee on the Performance of Transport Administrations. And well, Christos, I'll stop talking, I guess, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone who has been able to make it here today, and to our panelists for their very informative presentations today. So with that said, I would like to start going through the questions that we have. A lot of the questions, because today we have more of a thematic webinar, are actually going to be to all of our panelists, but I'll start the first one with a question to Christina. does the Intelligent Access Program help the management of freight movement during the crisis? And if yes, how?
Okay, so in Queensland, Intelligence Access Program, or IAP, is a road condition for our higher mass limit heavy vehicles. It's also for our special purpose vehicles such as crane, concrete pumps, and for those vehicles that have a permit that mandate IAP. So whilst COVID-19 did see an increase in both the volume and number of freight movements, that increase was spread across multi-modes, with both road and rail volumes in particular increasing. Because there was that spread of a multimodal increase in volumes, I'm unaware that COVID-19 actually brought about a need for any increase in enrolments in IAP.
Thank you, Christina. Our next question, it's going to go to everyone, but since I already have, we have you unmuted, we'll start with you. Are there truck driver controls between the states at the border, and did this affect the lead times?
So yes, Queensland did introduce border controls with our 3 bordering states. At the introduction of those border controls, it did raise some movement issues for the supply chain, with the major concern from heavy vehicle industry being compliance with fatigue management, and that would also be impacted by additional lead times required. What we did, however, through collaboration between industry and the 3 level of government, those issues were quickly identified and addressed, which brought about, as I said earlier, that heavy vehicles were waved through the border crossings, which limited the disruption to the scheduled transport movements. And in addition, the regulatory amendment to allow the loading docks and distribution centres to operate 24 hours also assisted in mitigating that.
Thank you, Christina. Patrick, I'll turn the same question to Caroline, please. Caroline?
Yeah, sorry, Christus. I think I was muted. Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, it was, are there truck driver control, what was the impact of COVID-19 are there truck driver controls between the states at the border, and did this affect the lead times?
Not really for Texas, other than at the border crossings where you had the federal agencies, determining what was essential and what wasn't essential. We had some of the issues there, but between Texas and the bordering state, we have Louisiana, we have Oklahoma, we have New Mexico. Not really any issues there between state borders, but on the international side with Mexico, we had some issues there. Some of the issues with the drivers were, we have drivers that live either in Texas or in Mexico, and generally they go back and forth and they have families and that live on either side. Some of the issues we heard was when they came to either in the United States or they were in Mexico and they're trying to come back, either walking or taking their kids to a family member for childcare. They had issues with either agency in terms of, them crossing by walking or driving was non-essential, yet they're an essential worker, as a truck driver. So there were some issues there, but I think those have been resolved now.
And, as a follow-up to actually everyone on these particular questions, did you implement priority lanes for trucks in Texas?
No, we did not. We do not have any truck-only priority lanes in Texas. I know that some of our toll roads were free, but not necessarily, in a special, priority lane. Since the speeds and there was really no traffic, there was really no need to do that.
Thank you, Caroline. Let's the same question to Piotr, please. relative to truck driver controls between the states, and when I say states, you know, whether it's also countries, and whether they affected lead times, and if you implemented any priority lanes for trucks.
Yes, of course, we don't have any issues with crossing borders by the heavy vehicles, and taxes, like said Caroline, you know, Poland is probably the same situation. But the second question was, could you repeat the second question?
So the second question was relative to if they affected the lead times and if you implemented any priority lanes for trucks.
Yes, we have on the some borders and some borders lanes for trucks, like in the border with Germany on A6 motorways.
Thank you, Piotr. And Layton, if I may please ask the same question of you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just in terms of our provincial or regional borders, what we had was mainly roadblock type of thing, where everyone, trucks included, and general motorists would be checked for compliance with lockdown regulations. This wouldn't have generated too much delays or increase the lead time, because the traffic, as you would have seen, had reduced so much by about 70%. So that wouldn't have been the case. But at the international borders into Mozambique and Zimbabwe, who are mainly our biggest trading partners, that's where the biggest problem came in terms of both sides wanting to do COVID screening and so on. So there, the delays went up to about 2 days in some cases because of that, especially in Mozambique. So that is where the problem is in terms of lead time. In terms of special lanes for trucks, no, we have such, but they wouldn't have been warranted because there's such a big decline in traffic generally about since pedestrian movement or light movement, like vehicles movement, is no longer there in this time, yeah. And public transport is also not allowed. So borders are fairly open, but the COVID screening and procedures, new procedures, are the main ones causing the delays. Thanks.
Thank you, Layton. Next question is to
Слушай, мне просто будет, мне довольно просто будет вывести на чистой воду этих пидоров, если что.
Our next question goes to Jens. And what are good experiences or not so good experiences with COVID-19 measures by road administrators and road operators that you have seen, Jens?
Thank you. I think that's a very important question that has been asked. I would like to highlight the most important and key problem, and that is the lack of international coordination and predictability. There are a lot of mushrooming of different measures, and if transport operators arrive at borders or are checked, they don't know if they have the right material with them, the right documentation with them. So that is the key problem, the lack of international coordination. What is working well, and here I would say it's a little bit more like a soft thing, and that is sometimes a little simple thank you message to transport operators for the work that they do. And you can see this quite often in reports from transport operators, from drivers, that they are controlled by police officers, by authorities, and these guys really say thank you for your work and please keep on helping us getting through this crisis.
Thank you, Jens. And if I may also ask you, since we have you here, in my previous question, I asked about border crossings. And one of the questions we have is, how have the guidelines for border crossings developed by UNICEF and IRU changed during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how were those decisions made, and what impact did they have?
It was very interesting to listen to the previous speakers. Quite a few of them said, well, we don't really have an issue. I just would like to highlight, we have never seen before borders again coming up in the EU. For the first time, we have borders again. There are checks at borders when you go from Germany to Austria, from Germany to France. There are checks for trucks at these new borders. This situation is even more dramatic when you leave the European Union and you go to Turkey, for example. The restrictions there are dramatic with long waiting times, to the extent that if you go a little bit further to other countries like Iran, this country is completely locked down. You cannot transport internationally from Iran to Turkey or the other neighboring countries. It is just impossible. So what we are saying, you need to keep transport going. You need to allow transport driving the economic recovery. And the best thing is to have dedicated lanes at borders to, first of all, give priority to goods that are needed, like emergency material, food, and then later on also goods that can drive the economic recovery. In the end, everything around us has and will be on a truck. The computer that you look to, the paper that you have in front of you has been at one point on a truck. So you have the trucking companies driving the economic recovery, and you need to have the departments of transport, the enforcement authorities, the customs authorities all work together to make this happen as smooth as possible.
Jens, thank you very much. Our next question will go to all of our panelists, and I will start with Christina. And have you seen any evidence that truck drivers have been affected disproportionately by COVID-19, and trucking routes are seeing transmission of infection? And if yes, what has been done, or actually, and what has been done to monitor and respond to this, including at border crossings?
Thank you for the question. Truck drivers being disproportionately affected was a big concern that we looked into at the beginning of our restrictions, especially in regards to ensuring if they were affected that we would still have sufficient number of truck drivers available to move freight. We haven't seen that disproportionate number occurring. Whilst I won't say what we've done to mitigate it, what I can say is that our Chief Health Officer provided some direction in regards to social distancing, hygiene. There were restrictions in regards to the number of drivers in the truck, so they couldn't have passengers that wasn't another driver for a two-up situation. Our government industry partnership working group also tackled PPE and provided sources that the industry could go to get sufficient PPE during the period. And that appears to have limited this becoming an issue for us.
Thank you, Christina. Caroline, may I ask the same question to you, please, relative to evidence of truck drivers being disproportionately affected by COVID-19 and measures taken to monitor that?
Yes, Crystal's, I think like Christina, really in the beginning, the national in the US, there was a heightened level of concern for the safety of the truck drivers. But I think, a couple of the issues that started in the beginning is, again, the fact that a lot of rest areas, that especially the private ones, the showers, everything was closed down, the lack of health-related items like masks, gloves, and sanitizer. But as the pandemic has continued, the truck drivers are very resilient. And one of the things that has kind of helped, I think Christina alluded to it, most of the truck drivers are single drivers. So they're literally pretty much self-isolated because they're the only person in their own truck. They kind of control that environment. I think the concerns was when they went to drop or pick a load, the exposure there, and then also the lack of facilities for them to take showers. So not really anything major we have heard within the United States, but also within Texas. Of course, us as a DOT, that's not necessarily our role. Our role has really been in making sure the rest stops, rest areas are open and they're clean so that the truck drivers can use the facilities.
Thank you, Caroline. Piotr, may I please ask you the same question?
Yes. From March 20, our heavy vehicles carrying international road transport goods are exempt from internal, like in Germany, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Lithuania, and sanitary border controls. From this date, we don't check any documents, any temperature, and we don't have any statistic about infection of COVID drivers, these heavy vehicles. So that's it.
Thank you, Piotr. Layton?
And can I have one question to Jens?
Please.
Yeah, I have one question because on the chat Martin write to everyone, and so I think it's a good question. Maybe you can say something about that. Could you observe a modal shift from road to rail or other modes?
We're going to actually get to that one.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Thank you very much. Layton, if I can ask the question to you, please, relative to evidence on truck drivers being disproportionately affected.
Yeah, at this stage, we don't have sufficient data to come to that conclusion, but equally, there's been a lot of change in standard operating procedures, either from the truck operators themselves and so on, and the limitations in occupancy of the cabin, etc. And in most cases where the deliveries are made or at the source, there's also precautions taken there, you know. So there is no, our infection rate is still relatively low. And maybe as more and more industries are opening on our side, we might see something like that coming through. Thanks.
Thank you, Layton. So what I'll do, I will ask the same question of Jens, and then we'll follow up with the question that Piotr brought up relative to if people have observed a modal shift from road to rail or any of the other modes. So Jens, relative to truck driving, have you observed anything that you can report to us?
Thank you for giving me the floor again. Have they been disproportionately affected? I also have to say we don't have figures on that. What Caroline said is also our view at the global level. There are some concerns about the situation at the loading bays, picking up and the delivering of loads, the interaction with people at the customs checks, the situation at rest areas, are there appropriate facilities available? And what we are saying, on the one hand, you should limit the interaction with people when you have transport operators delivering goods. And we say there are some, for example, tried and tested UN conventions like the TIR convention, which reduces the custom checks at borders. So that's already a good tool. The second tool that we provide is guidelines for drivers, how to behave and avoid exposure. We have worked on that also together with the trade unions, and we have reached out to the International Labour Organization which highlighted this issue also at the last G20 meeting of the labor ministers. So while we don't have exact data on it, we do see that there are some issues that needs to be addressed, and we also have some suggestions how they can be addressed. If you allow me, I would continue with the modal shift question directly.
Yes, please.
At the moment, we see a decrease in global trade, which is dramatic. And as I said, WTO is predicting a decrease of up to 32% in 2020. This decrease is for all modes of transport. It's for maritime, it's for road, for rail, inland waterways. They're all affected by that. We don't see, as of yet, a considerable modal shift. What we do see is what I tried to highlight at the beginning is that within the goods transport sector, different sectors are differently affected. For example, long distance transport is down, transport of automotive parts, flowers, construction material is down to almost 100%, whereas it is true the transport in the last mile delivery of perishable goods and so on and so forth has increased. So you have to look at it a little bit more into detail, but does that have a proven tangible effect on modal shift? I would say no at the moment, but without having all the detailed figures yet in front of me.
Thank you very much, Jens. The next question will go to Layton. And have you seen any impact on truck accidents due to limited rest stops?
At this stage, with the limited data we have, no. And one other factor that makes it very difficult is that because the mixed traffic has reduced so much that almost 90% of the light vehicles are off the road. So the accident statistics are actually very skewed. If I were to give an example, in South Africa around the Easter period, we have about 1,000 fatalities on the road in the month of April. And this year, because of the COVID lockdown, we had only 26 accidents. So the figures in terms of accidents are very distorted. We might get a clearer picture as we start to ramp up with the other sectors being opened, yes.
Thank you, Layton. Piotr, may I ask you the same question?
Sorry, Chris.
Oh, go ahead, Layton.
If I may add, there are ongoing engagement with the Road Freight Association and then Department of Transport to open, to address the issue of rest stops and food for drivers and so on. I think it was to an extent an oversight in the regulations, so that will also be addressed soon.
Thank you, Layton. So that's actually a very important and I'll point that you brought up relative to the regulations. And so I'll ask the next question to everybody as well, starting with Caroline. Was there an easement of truck traffic regulations like driving and resting hours, driving bans, etc.?
In terms of hours of service, that's regulated at the federal level, and certainly the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration on March 13th in the US issued hours of service regulatory relief to commercial drivers since we were in an emergency. And this included fuel haulers, so certainly they could go above and beyond their hours of service requirements. So that was nationwide. And then some of the other things that some of the states have done, issue relief for oversized, increasing oversized and overweight limits. Some states have done that, including Texas, where they kind of relaxed that a little bit. So from a regulatory piece, that's kind of what we're seeing throughout the United States. Some states have not, but some have. And then, you know, in terms of cross-border kind of similar things, because Mexico has a higher weight limit than we do. So some of that, I think, was to help make sure that we were getting supplies where they were needed.
Christina?
Sorry about that. In relation to fatigue management, so operating hours for our heavy vehicle drivers, they remain in place easing of that restriction. We did, however, offer other easing of restrictions in relation to curfew permit, face-to-face audit requirements, use of supplementary work diaries, temporary variations, heavy vehicle escort requirements. In some instances, certifiers are able to engage third parties to conduct physical inspections. In addition to that, with some of our heavy vehicle drivers that are held at medical certificate, we're having some difficulty getting to the doctor. For those cases where the medical condition had not changed or worsened, they were able to apply to the Department of Transport and Main Roads for an extension to the last valid medical certificate for up to 6 months.
Thank you, Christina. Unfortunately, you were breaking off here, but relative to this question, Jens, are there any early lessons, you know, concerning how logistics and mobility are affected by some of the changes in the traffic regulations?
Allow me, Christos, to quickly reply to your earlier questions about some of the flexibility of rules. I would say, based on the advocacy work of the road transport sector with international organizations, we have seen some flexibility on the interpretation of driving rules. For example, the so-called hours of service, the driving restaurant rules in the EU have been more flexible. The OECD /International Transport Forum have a permit system, and there the related vehicle certificates have a longer duration. Our work with the UNECE, the UN, they have a convention called ADR, Transport of Dangerous Goods. There we managed to have a prolongation of existing certificates validity. And when it comes to some of the documentation that is needed for customs authorities, like the TIARC, you don't need to pick them up, but you can use electronic documents and print them at home. Now, the lessons that we can learn from this is there is now an opportunity to turn this challenge into something positive and turn the industry into something more digital. And we hope that we come out of this with more use of electronic documents like electronic consignment notes, electronic tier, electronic visa, e-permits, and so on and so forth. So that is something that has been a solution for the moment, and hopefully there will be a wider spread use after the coronavirus.
Jens, thank you very much. Hopefully, as we are continuing to be going through this crisis, one of the things that we will be looking for is to really identify some of the lessons that we have learned, so that, and things that they can implement it in the future to also help with efficiency. So this is, we have to learn now so that we can also, you know, see things past this crisis. So with that, okay, we have enough time for 2 more questions. So we'll do 2 questions relative to one on the increment on road accidents to everybody. What we have seen in some of our previous webinars is that some of our panelists indicated that there has been an increment in road accidents or in the severity of road accidents. Is this something that you have seen as well? Start the question with Layton.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, that right now, because of the major reduction in traffic, no, we haven't seen a very severe. We are used to a lot of very severe accidents on our roads. but it has since gone down because of the decline in volumes of traffic. Yes.
Thank you, Layton. Piotr?
We don't have any statistics about road accidents. The statistic has police, but I saw in our cameras or TV that I didn't see any accident with trucks. Only passenger cars, and it's really a small number of these accidents.
Thank you, Piotr. Christina?
We have had accidents both with heavy vehicles and light vehicles. I am yet to see the data or an analysis report on whether
I think we're definitely, Christina is breaking up on us. So, Caroline?
Yes, thank you, Christos. In Texas, generally we are one of the highest states when it comes to crashes. I think this year we're at about maybe 1,000. But I think with the stay-at-home measures, where now most of the vehicles on the roadways are trucks and the commercial drivers, certainly our crash rates for the last, the COVID months, and are lower than previous years the same time around. So we're going to definitely see a dip in crashes and fatalities within the state. Still, we have not had one day without a death on our roadways. So I think we're still seeing crashes even with the lower level of truck, not just truck volumes, but traffic volumes, period. But less risk with the trucks and passenger vehicles during this COVID time frame.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Jens, I've saved the last question for you, and then I'll turn we'll go back to Patrick. Any early lessons learned concerning how freight and logistics mobility are affected by a societal crisis of this scale?
I think you can say that the road transport industry has dramatically been affected by the crisis. But at the same time, the road transport sector will be the first one to drive the economic recovery. We need to help this road transport sector to be able to drive the economic recovery, address liquidity problems, and with the vision that we turn this into a better transport sector, which is more environmentally friendly and more digital in the future. So these are some of the lessons that we have learned, and hopefully the vision that we can implement later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jens. And thank you once again to all of our panelists and presenters for the excellent material that they shared with us today, and for the great discussion that our audience, help us provide by asking all these insightful questions to everybody. In closing, I would like to ask, the very last question to Patrick, relative to what else is PIARC planning, in the future as part of their response to COVID-19. Patrick?
Thank you, Christos. Thank you. And also, I would like to extend my personal thanks to Martin Rich, who is the chair from Switzerland, who is the chair of our freight committee and who has been instrumental in organizing the webinar today. He was not one of the speakers, but he was really one of the masterminds behind the webinar. And thank you to all our panelists from our committee membership, and to Jens from the International Road Transport Union. So the next steps, the conclusions. So we are going to use the material from this webinar in one of our future notes. So the recording from today, the presentations, will be shared on our website, probably tomorrow, I guess. We're planning future webinars as well. There will be another one next Wednesday, so 1 week from now. And then it's very likely there will be another one 1 week later on the 20th. And this one will be focused on funding and planning issues. We see that the analysis of road projects and the financing of all our road projects are completely changed as to what is the baseline, and we have to think about how we can incorporate that and what kind of recommendations PIARC can make to its members. So there will be a webinar on this. On the 15th, which is this Friday, we have, Friday next week. On the 15th, Friday next week, we have a webinar jointly organized with the UK's DFID on gender and transport and the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on gender issues in transportation. So I invite you to stay tuned and to check our website for those notes. And you can continue contributing if you want. So if you want to share with us issues of concern on which you would like PIARC to work, there's a form for that. And if you'd like to volunteer and speak in one of our future webinars, there's another form for that. The two links are on the web page, on the page here. They're also available from our website. So I invite you to just go and check that and contribute if you're interested. With this, thank you again to the response team and my colleagues from all those committees, and to Christos in particular, who was moderating the questions and answers. Don't hesitate and drop us a question or remark at info@piarc.org about anything you want, actually. And again, thank you everyone for your time. I think it was a really great webinar, and I look forward to the next ones. And I look forward to continue working with every one of you, a single one of you. Goodbye and stay safe. Thank you.